Hello, I'm Michel Gagné, and you are listening to the Real Time Visual Effects Podcast, where wizards reside.
You have a gift. You have a passion for creation. There's something inside you that wants to express itself, and that something has led you to explore the world of visual effects, a place where magic happens, and the only limitation is your imagination. All the greatest artists in the world started somewhere, learning and growing into the people they are today. You being here is the first step to building your legacy as an artist. Learn from the best and brightest in the real-time visual effects community. Sharpen your skills and be your best self. Today's episode is an interview with Thomas Harle, a freelance VFX artist in England. Thomas shares his experience working as a freelancer, being an educator and tutoring other students, and his YouTube series for technical advice in Unreal Engine's material editor. With that said, let's get started.
Here is your host, Travis McCallum.
Hello, everybody. I've got Thomas Harle, a VFX artist with us. He is also a tutor for Escape Studios. Tom, how are you doing today?
I'm good, thanks. Yeah, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, man. It's 60 degrees here in Dallas, Texas. You said it was raining over there in London?
It's grey and raining here in London. Yeah, just for a change.
So today we're going to get into what it means to be a visual effects artist and kind of like your experience, especially working at places like Escape Studios, Splash Damage, Ubisoft, and even at Rebellion. But before we get into that, how'd you get into visual effects, Tom?
Yeah, so I had quite a strange route into the industry. So my original background was in architecture and engineering. So I did a 4-year master's studying those two subjects. But by the end of the degree, I kind of decided I liked making 3D images of buildings more than I liked designing buildings. So I kind of graduated then, knew I wanted to move into some kind of 3D graphics type thing. Worked for a couple of years as an engineer, just saving some money and trying to kind of like do it on my own back. And it's obviously really hard. It's a really tricky industry to get into. And then I sort of took the plunge and I went and studied at Escape Studios, where I now am working as a teacher. And I did a 12-week introduction to environment art sort of course. And that got me my first job at Rebellion, where technically I was hired as an environment artist. But after the first project I worked on was Never Dead, and I didn't really do any environment art. It was more kind of setting up technical destruction and that kind of things. And then by the end of that, one of the other VFX artists was leaving, so there was an opportunity. And I'd been working a lot with the effects team because I was setting up the destruction in engine. I was doing a lot with the sort of the particle effects and everything. And it seemed like a really cool thing to be doing within sort of the game art space. So I asked to move across, and they were happy to give me some internal training. And then that was it. I was a VFX artist.
That's cool, man. So thinking about real-time visual effects, what does that mean to you, maybe in comparison to other areas that you've seen in visual effects?
Yeah, so
like if you had to define it in like one word, I'm not one word, maybe one sentence. That's a little hard.
One sentence. Yeah, I mean, so it is so difficult because it means so much to like every different project's different, every different like studio that you work at is going to be different. But to me, it's dealing with constraints. It's problem solving with constraints. And sometimes the problems that you're solving, how do I make this fire look the best it possibly can? How do I make it look super realistic? But so often with VFX, the problems, things like how do I communicate this effect to a player? How do I communicate the AOE size of my character? Or how do I deal with my frame rate being low? Like, how do I optimize this effect? Obviously, we can go into things like Houdini and we can render out crazy fluid sims and like that all looks amazing, but that doesn't necessarily work for a video game, right? It doesn't work for real time. So we have to do all of that cool, make it look amazing stuff, but also make it run, make it work, make it kind of like suit the game that we're making. So yeah, it's a more, we joke around with the film artists at work, but it's like we do everything they do, but also it's 60 frames a second. So
what did you wish you had known when you got started out in visual effects?
Yeah, I was thinking about this earlier. I think it's a really difficult question because, I mean, my career's gone pretty well. Like I'm really happy where I've ended up. I'm really happy with the things that I've done. I think realistically, the biggest sort of like, if I could go back and tell myself kind of like question would be the just the hard work pays off. There was a couple of years when I was working as an engineer and I was sort of giving my nights and weekends over to doing 3D, and I wasn't sure it was going to happen, if you know what I mean. I was like, I just wasn't good enough. I didn't have the time to do both full-time job and sort of study, but the sacrifices were worth it. You put the time in, and yeah, like if you put the hours in, you can get there.
So I'm just curious, when you say put in the hours and kind of sacrifice, what did that life look like for you in that time period? Like, did you go off of like 4 hours of sleep a night or something? Or
No, I mean, I wasn't ever that bad, but like quite often my weekends would be I'd finish work on a Friday, I'd maybe go out and have like a quick drink with some friends, but then get to the computer, work all evening. Saturday mostly work, and then like Sunday maybe actually go out and do some groceries and like the kind of real life stuff. But I mean, I was giving a lot of evenings and a lot of weekends up to be working on 3D things.
Yeah, I personally struggle with staying disciplined and focused in on my task, especially when I get out of my day job. Do you have any kind of life hacks or things to stay on task and not be distracted?
So I get a lot of stick this from my students at the moment. So I still listen to the radio. I'll have a radio show that I like that's like 2 hours long, and I'll just get home and I'll stick it on, and that's it. And that's my kind of work time. And it doesn't matter how productive you are in those 2 hours. If you have a really bad day and you just kind of like keep dashing around and going on the internet or whatever, that's fine, because you're going to do it the next day, if you know what I mean. So, but there's a 2 hour time slot every evening when you get home when it's work time. And then that over time, after weeks and months, like that kind of 2 hours a day adds up. But like having it kind of like regimented and kind of like set aside with this sort of radio show as my kind of like time tracker, I found that really helpful. I found that worked. And you weren't overworking, because it's very easy if you get into something, you could like, oh, I could do 5 or 6 hours of an evening on this, but other things suffer. Like you say, you can like run out of sleep, or like you kind of aren't having a social interaction with your friends. Or so 2 hours a day set aside, nice radio show or an album that you really like, something like that, just so that it's sort of a marked period of time.
That's good habit building techniques.
Yeah.
So right now, what are you most curious about? What's got your interest and your attention right now?
So the things I'd really like to sort of push more into, obviously Niagara is the sort of the big kind of tentpole, like this is the thing that's coming, or is it here yet? Is it coming still? Is it? I don't quite know. I haven't had much time to dig into it. I did look a little when it first came out, but it was still in that kind of experimental, kind of not quite ready for use stage. But just like how much is that going to change, not just the work that I do, but like the course that I teach, and like the power that that's going to kind of like give to artists in the industry.
And
that's
can you tell our listeners maybe what Niagara is, just to give some context?
Right. So in the Unreal Engine, there are now 2 different particle systems or particle editors. One of them is called Cascade. It's been around for a very long time. Back Unreal, I think it's the original particle editors, like Unreal 1. I've been using it for a very long time as well. And it's incredibly powerful. Like it's very feature full. You can do all sorts of things with it. It's been extended over the years, but it's also like, it's finicky, right? There's things that are buggy about it. There's things that don't work that well. Some of the UI is really difficult. Having been teaching Cascade now for a few years, it's a real nightmare. Like the improvements you could make to that part of the software just with a little bit of UI improvement would be huge. But obviously Unreal or Epic have been focusing on their new editor, so that's Niagara. It's using the same kind of dichotomies, and so it's still module based, it's still stack based, but it also has a huge amount of extra functionality. So you can bring data in from other sources, you can build instances, so you can have reusability, and it just extends that power, that the capacity of what the effects editor can do so much. But at the same time, you have to ask, is it worth the power? And yeah, so I mean, it's a whole new kind of like engine, a whole new system within real-time effects, within Unreal, that I just haven't quite had time to get my hands on and play with yet.
So if we have anybody from Epic, definitely put some tutorials and teach us newbies about it and get it as in production, so we can start using that. It sounds really powerful.
Yeah, well, that's kind of what I'm waiting for, I think, is that like I'm sure when Niagara is finally going to be released to production ready, there is going to be a huge amount of push from Epic, because they do that, right? They do a lot of live streams, and there's a bit of data out now, but I think when I tried to look at it before, it was just kind of missing a few features, and like I've seen that the UI's changed quite a lot, and you don't want to get too involved in working with a new piece of software until it's ready, just because everything can change. And so soon.
Yeah, absolutely. So can you tell us, we hear a lot about success stories, but we know there's opportunities to learn from failures. So I'm just curious if there's been any failures or struggles or challenges that you've had through your own career that you've learned from, and you can kind of impart some of that wisdom to us.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about this question earlier as well. It's a bit tricky. Within sort of like the professional space, there's such a good support network around you that it's quite rare. I mean, we all make mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. Everything goes wrong occasionally. But like, you've got your colleagues, and you've got your art lead, and you've got your team lead, and you've got the director. It's got so many kind of extra people around you supporting you that big mistakes tend not to happen. I will say, so I'm actually colorblind, and so a couple of times I've had some problems with color in my work. So I very famously made a green fire, just because like it was kind of like on that yellowy kind of side of, yeah, and I just sort of like, okay, yeah, that's fine, looks good to me, and it turned green, and the whole game just had green fire in it for about a week, and everyone was a bit like, why has this happened? What? And my art director, he didn't know. He came up to me and was like, why is the fire green? I was like, oh, is it? Okay. And he looked at me and was like, are you colorblind? And I'm like, yes, I am. And like, just from then on, like, we just double checked all the color work that I did. I asked my colleagues, like, I already knew, and like, I'm pretty good about making sure I color pick and double check my color work. But just from that point onwards, everything that I did, it became a bit of a running joke. It was fine, but everything had to be double checked. But the people surrounding me and the people supporting me could do that and help me through that. There was a pink sun once as well. So, I mean, like, yeah, my color work maybe could be a little bit better, but it's fine. There's people who can help me with that.
Totally. When you're actually looking at the work of others, what are some things that you are looking at to help them or to help improve their work?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really open-ended, difficult question as well. Like, so it so depends on everything, if you know what I mean. Like, dealing with my students at Scope, like, they all have questions, and it's always kind of like, oh, how many polygons should this model be? And the answer is, it depends, right? Because it's the same model used in different ways. Like, if it's a mobile game, it probably wants to be quite a low number. If it's a AAA game, obviously it can be a high number. If it's going to be a cinematic, then maybe that's front of camera wants to be even higher. If it's the main character, like, you take something like a chair, there is no right amount of polygons for a chair. And it's the same in VFX. Like, people say, okay, well, what's texture size should this be? I don't know. And then you break it down into what's the important part of it. So if you're talking about something like a fire effect, obviously if you're going for realistic or stylized, all the timing, the motion, the color, all these things are really important to that kind of effect. But then if you look at someone's work and they're doing more environmental effects, they're doing some dust in the air, or kind of like, then it's more about making a mood. And it's one of the things that's really great about VFX is that we get to do everything. We get to do a little bit of like high impact, fast destruction stuff. We get to do little background things. We get to make kind of water and fire. Do you know what I mean? There's so much kind of in everything. So what you're looking for in each piece of work really depends. Like, if it's an impact effect, it's about that kind of like timing. If it's a water effect, maybe it's about realism. So yeah, it's a difficult question to answer.
Has there been maybe an effect that you've worked on recently?
What, that I've been particularly kind of proud of, or like?
I was thinking in terms of like what your thought process when you were putting it together and getting it out. Kind of that process.
Yeah, so I mean, I've been working on a few fire things for the Unreal Marketplace at the moment, and it's just kind of trying to get that balance between kind of the speed of the effect, the motion, trying to get something that has, obviously we use repetitive flipbooks and looping, but also trying to break that up in some way, either with some settings in Cascade, or just trying to push the sort of the realism to it, really focusing on some reference, kind of getting those little kind of flicks and kind of sort of deep diving. I think sometimes people have a tendency to, they'll look at effect or like a reference or something, and then they'll kind of be like, okay, that works, I like that. They'll get the main parts correct. Do you know what I mean? They'll get the main motion or the main color, but then there's always like little secondary details and the richness that makes it feel kind of like alive, or makes it feel kind of, it's so difficult with effects because there's some kind of concepts that don't go into words, but you know what I mean? There's that feeling of kind of like, oh yeah, that really has that kind of like niceness to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see oftentimes different visual effects artists have different approaches in going into it. And kind of like how you pointed out, if it's real life versus stylized, you may start with concept art and kind of like draw it all out, or you may just grab reference photos and kind of base it off of whatever that stock footage is. So yeah, it is very ambiguous, and it's up to personal taste.
Yeah, no, I think so, definitely. And like, I mean, and style as well. Like, I mean, I think the more you make, the more you kind of like put your own little spin on it. Obviously, when you talk about kind of cartoonists, like they have their own style to things. And so, and I think you can look at some VFX, especially when you've been working with your colleagues for quite a while, like you look at them and be like, oh yeah, that's definitely a so-and-so's effect. Because like you can see their little fingerprint in something about it. So
cool, man. Cool. So I'm just curious, what are some trends that you're seeing out in the industry right now? What's catching your eye in the news?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, one of the new techniques that came out not so long ago, but like I think is maybe getting a little bit overused, is the sort of this GPU particle style effect. Do you know what I mean by that? Like where you just have lots of tiny little dots. So for a long time, Cascade or a long time game
Sparks,
engines,
right? You see a lot of Sparks use GPU nowadays, and that's graphical processing unit. So it's like your graphics card.
Yes, basically. So in computer graphics, or you've got your CPU, that's your brain that's doing all the thinking, and then you've got your GPU, that's the kind of the drawing part, that's the rendering things to the screen. And GPUs are really fast at doing the same thing, really simple calculations, but really fast at doing a lot of them. And so what we can do now, as of a few years ago, is we can move the particle simulations off onto the GPU. And for a long time, we were really limited in how many sprites we could have on screen, just because they were all taking a lot of brain power, a lot of CPU time to calculate. So by moving them off onto the GPU, suddenly you can have thousands or millions of particles. But there's not that many realistic effects that have millions of particles in them. And it's kind of, I think, they've been unleashed. Do you know what I mean? Like suddenly there's this toy that they can use that's really powerful and sometimes looks really cool, but also sometimes I think it's maybe getting overused a little bit, or kind of like isn't necessarily the right tool for the job. And just kind of like these big clouds of dots. Yeah, it looks cool, but it doesn't necessarily work for the effect all the time, in my opinion, if that makes sense. So
Okay, gotcha. So kind of moving into more specifically toward what you're doing right now, you're working as a freelancer and you've worked at some other studios as well. When you think about your visual effects process, what is it like being a freelancer?
Yeah, well, I mean, so yeah, my setup's a bit of a strange one in that I teach part-time and that takes up about 50% of my capacity. And then I have some assets available on the NBA marketplace, which is kind of a background freelance job. So if I don't have any other work, then I'll work on something new for that. And there's kind of like an ongoing, so I'm never completely out of work. And then freelance roles, as they come and go, I'll do kind of like short bursts of intense work on a project. Yeah, I mean, the freedom of being kind of my own boss and working between those very different sort of subject matters is really nice. Yeah, I mean, with the freelance work versus studio, I think I work on my own. So, I mean, it's a work from home gig. And so it tends to be much more kind of like you're obviously talking to the client, but you're more bringing solutions to the client. So there's less of that creative process within sort of the development of the work, if that makes sense. So like if we had a problem on a game and we've got a 5-person team of effects artists, we're going to sit down, we're going to discuss it, we're going to work together. And there's a bit of that with the sort of client relationship with freelance, but it's more you kind of bring solutions as options as opposed to when you're working in a studio in a team, you've got more kind of capacity to communicate and come up with the solutions together.
So I'm curious, like in the studio environment, at least, oftentimes studios may have as little as one visual effects artist and sometimes
Yep.
teams. So when it comes to maybe in the team environment, how do y'all kind of like divvy up the work and decide who's working on what?
Yeah, I mean, again, it depends a lot on the individual projects, but mostly it comes down to what your strengths are. When we worked on Gears Ultimate, we had a team of 4 or 5 effects artists throughout the whole thing, and it was just one guy had a really good background with weapons and blood and sort of gameplay related effects, so he took all the gameplay effects. And I've got quite a lot of simulation background, so I've done big rigid body sims in Maya, so I ended up taking on most of that work. And so there was obviously time when things moved, but it was that kind of communication. So we kept things pretty fluid, but the people who had more skill in a certain area or possibly wanted to work in that area. So if you wanted to improve your skills, you'd sort of try and negotiate that was the work that you wanted to do. And yeah, and then you'd have, like I say, your lead and your art director. And then obviously the requirements of the project, so the deadlines. So sometimes it's just kind of like, okay, we've got a task, need to do this. This needs to be done by the weekend. Right, who's got capacity to jump on and do it? So it's a real mix of approaches. But
Cool, man. Cool. So I'm just curious, the transition that you had from being an environmental artist to visual effects, what was that like?
So it kind of didn't really ever happen, to be honest. So although technically I was hired as an environment artist, my first role was on a game called Never Dead, and it was a game with a fully destructible environment. It was all part of the gameplay. So I never actually made any assets for that game. I just took things that people had already made and destroyed them. So I was breaking up things with various Voronoi shattering tools, and like making not rigid body sims because we were using in-engine physics, but taking pieces and kind of fracturing them and then setting them up so that everything in the game had a certain health value, and then you could have stage destruction. And so although I was technically part of the environment team, I wasn't actually doing environment art. And to be honest, I was fine with that. Like I enjoy the technical challenges. I've got quite a technical background, and it was good to be working with the effects. It was a position that no one else wanted, and so I got to be kind of, everyone would come to me with help with the specific system that we had, and it was so integrated to the game that it was kind of everywhere. So I got to meet everyone and work really closely with the team. And then at the end of the role, I moved on to the Sniper Elite series, and I was asked to make a sticker kind of on one of the planes as a reward for having all my hard work doing technical stuff and not artwork. But that was the same time I kind of asked to move into VFX anyway. So I think I've only ever made one prop for a video game as an environment artist, and then I was kind of straight into technical and VFX roles. So it wasn't so much as a transition. I've kind of always been doing VFX.
I know we were talking earlier about what it's like being a visual effects artist and freelance, but for those that want to take the leap into freelancing, they're already working at a studio. What's some maybe advice or thoughts that you have for making that jump, and what can they expect?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I kind of sort of fell into it, really. It's a tricky one because, like, when I started out, like, the support network I had came from the Unreal Marketplace effects that I had. So I made a few things, and then, like, I had a little sort of trickle income coming from that, which gave me a sort of a support. But unfortunately, I think the marketplace hasn't quite got the same kind of capacity that it used to. Like, I kind of got in at the right time. So while I would definitely encourage people to make things for the marketplace, if that's something they're interested in, like, there isn't quite the same, yeah, capacity within the marketplace to support people in the way it used to be. So I'm not just saying don't compete with me because it's my place, get out. No, but it's more kind of like having some.
Yeah, I've read the
having some
reviews
stability.
On the marketplace. Sometimes people are like, "This is terrible. Don't buy this stuff. Don't ever go to this person." And then sometimes
Yeah,
it's like, "Give me my money back." It's like,
well, I mean, I've had a few people asking for refunds, but there's definitely a problem with piracy. And, like, I don't want to sort of just kind of air my dirty laundry too much, but, like, there's definitely, like, you can go to websites and you can see how many kind of like downloads have been done that obviously you're not getting any money from. And like, it's fine. It's a part of the industry. It's part of how any kind of digital media is always going to work. But I think maybe there could be a bit more done to maybe prevent that a little bit.
right.
Or I don't know. Yeah, it's tricky. But the difficult thing with freelancing, like from what I hear, is always this kind of not knowing where the next paycheck comes from.
Mm-hmm.
But because I had enough work set up through the marketplace, I kind of always knew where the next paycheck was. And it meant that I had a bit more freedom to sort of like be a bit more picky about which jobs I picked and that kind of thing. So yeah, it's a difficult one because, like, I think my process or my kind of transition into freelance has been very untypical. And so I wouldn't want to give some advice to people that maybe doesn't work for sort of the standard approach. But maybe, I mean, the other thing is find a part-time job as well. Like, if you've got some experience in the industry, and we're always looking for more people in education. I mean, here in London, but like I know from like a lot of the other schools around the world, being able to work part-time 1 or 2 days a week with the school, it gives you a really nice steady income, a really rewarding kind of work environment to be in. And so keeping your income streams broad and separate means that if you're just freelancing and you lose a gig, suddenly you're in a real difficult position. Whereas if you've got 2 or 3 different things going on, maybe it's okay. So yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of the schools, at least here in Dallas, they have games programs, but they maybe spend maybe a week tops on visual effects and they just move on to other areas. So I definitely see a demand for visual effects artists in teaching.
Yeah, no, definitely.
You also do education for VFX artists on your YouTube channel, and I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so that kind of started completely by accident. I'd been working for Escape, so I'd been making some videos for work, and so I'd kind of got used to the idea of sitting in front of a computer and talking through what I was doing. And a while back for them, I did a sort of a live webinar based around UVs and techniques from that. And basically, someone had messaged me, or they'd messaged Escape, and it had come back to me asking some questions about this. And I was like, okay, well, I'll answer your questions, but you kind of need images. And then so I'd made some images to send to them, and I was like, well, actually, it still doesn't really explain it very well. I'd rather just kind of talk to them. So I just recorded a quick video and I put it on YouTube, and I kind of just meant for it to be direct to that one person who'd asked that question. But luckily 80 Level, the industry website, picked up the fact that I'd done this and kind of publicized it for me. And so to this day, it's still one of the most viewed videos I've got, partly because it was the first one, but partly because it got so much of the traffic from 80 Level. And I was like, yeah, this is quite fun. I quite like giving something back. Kind of people come with me with questions, and it's like I can explain it in 10, 15 minutes. And you really need a video to sort of make those kind of like explanations. Obviously, there's things on the Discord. People ask questions, and like, yeah, you communicate quickly through text, but it doesn't really communicate properly, if you know what I mean. So I started putting out a video every couple of weeks, and it works really well with the teaching that I do. So we had a couple of the students were struggling with specific topics, and it just meant that I could obviously spend time with them in class, but I could also just like spend the time on the weekend, make a quick video, and then it was there for them to kind of like go over multiple times, and I could share that information between the different classes that I teach. And so they kind of like the teaching work that I do at Escape kind of feeds back into the YouTube channel, and that feeds back into Escape. And it's quite a nice kind of little setup. And hopefully, I mean, I've been a little bit busy with work at the moment, so I haven't done any new videos yet this year, but I'm going to be going back to part-time teaching soon and trying to kind of expand that a bit more and try and do a few more videos.
Yeah, as an Unreal user, I find the material editor is a beast to learn. So I often reference your technical videos, especially on UV distortion, because it keeps it ingrained in my head. So really cool to see those.
Effects is a bit like that. where it's kind of like you need to have, there's so many like little techniques that are all completely independent from other techniques, and you use it once and then you kind of like 6 months later, you're like, oh yeah, there was a thing that I could do, and like, how did I do that? And like, it's funny. So I've actually referenced my own videos before where I've kind of like, I know I did this before. I can't remember how I did it. And I went back and I rewatched something that I'd done to remind myself of what I should have already known. But you don't use a technique for a year and then you go back and it's like, I know where it was. So I mean, I'm learning from my own videos as well. So that's helpful.
So you started tutoring at Escape Videos. What does tutoring look like?
So the original, so I did my course there myself way back in 2010. And at the time it was just environment art, and that was great. I really enjoyed my course. And then a few years ago, the head of games got in touch, and they just wanted to ask me kind of like my sort of career story. Could they use me on their website as a sort of testimonial? And I was like, yeah, cool. And we started talking back and forth, and they were just kind of looking to expand the games course at the time. And so they asked me originally to get involved to write the course content, give some feedback on kind of like the curriculum. And sort of one thing led to another. And so I ended up teaching a couple of weeks of the first class that were using the curriculum that I'd helped shape. And I really enjoyed it. And so I kind of picked up a few more hours. And so the main thing I've been doing, so we actually do degree level education now. So we do the master's degree, and it's an 18-week of tuition. So 12 weeks are done by one of my colleagues first, and they do everything from mobile, basic modeling, texturing. We go into substance, we get into baking. They do sort of like a small mobile project, and then a more kind of like AAA style diorama. And then they come to me, and we do, so the part of the course is called Advanced Game Art and VFX. And about half of it is more kind of what I would call the more advanced game art stuff. So it's still environment art, but it's more animated materials or well-positioned offset shaders, stuff like that. Stuff that's not necessarily definitely VFX, but it's also a little bit more on the advanced end of environment art. And then we do simulations and cascade and particles. And yeah, it's pretty good. We've pretty small class sizes. So most we've had was 9. Typical classes, kind of like 6 students. So you get to know them really well. And it's a full-time office environment. So it's 10 till 4 every day, me standing in front of a computer, telling them how to do some of the things that I know how to do. So it's pretty good. Yeah.
So this is all on site inside the classroom, right?
Yes. Yeah. So we've got a couple of floors of a big office building in central London, and we're expanding. I mean, Escape Studios.
If we had any like people living in London who wanted to sign up for one of your classes, how would they do that? Or do you have any vacancies? Just curious.
Yeah. So I mean, we're always taking new. So we do 2 short courses a year, and that's the master style that I am involved with. We also do degree programs. So we have undergraduate. We do 3-year undergraduate in games, and then I mean, Escape Studios does games, film, compositing, animation, VFX. So all that kind of like TV and games media. And yeah, we have offices based in central London. You just kind of come along and apply. There's an application process, so we have to like check that your work's good and you've up to a certain standard before you come and do our course. And yeah,
that's cool, man. That's cool. All right, Tom, let's get into the lightning round. These questions are fast and easy, just like visual effects. What is a perfect one-day getaway in Torquay and the surrounding area? Did I pronounce it right? Torquay?
You did not. Sorry. Torquay. So yeah, Torquay's a coastal town, so there's a beach there, but the beach isn't amazing. So I would go up to Dartmoor. So Dartmoor National Park is nearby, sort of a moorland. It's wonderful views, and they have these little rocky outcrops that you can go and climb on. And so just get out in the nature and yeah, spend a nice day. Hopefully in the sun. We get some sun in Torquay, but yeah.
What video game or mobile app are you using on your phone that is the most fun?
See, I've got a terrible answer for this, but Google Sheets. So I do all my planning and organizing with spreadsheets on Google Sheets, and that's the thing that I use on my phone more than any. I'm a pretty organized person, I guess. Like I have a spreadsheet for kind of present ideas for all my friends and family. So when it comes to Christmas, I'm like, oh, I'll just check the spreadsheet and see what I need to buy people. So Google Sheet. I mean, I play games and things on my phone, but I've got a pretty high turnover. So it tends to be download something, play it for a few days, move on. So no sort of long-term consistent games there, but Google Sheets is always there front and foremost.
That's the secret to being good at math, right?
Yeah.
What is your favorite thing to cook or eat?
So, I mean, favorite thing to eat, definitely, I think a pizza. Can't go wrong with a good pizza.
What toppings?
Cooking, I do tend to, what toppings? A little meat, but not too much. Like people always go for like meat feasts and it's just like, over the top. So maybe a little chicken, some vegetables, onions, peppers, that kind of thing. And then a stuffed crust. That's the important thing. A nice cheesy stuffed crust. Yeah.
What is your favorite book or podcast you've listened to recently?
Yeah, so I listen to quite a lot of podcasts, kind of like the walk to work and back, and try and keep a kind of an ear to what the industry is doing. So just on the sort of consumer side, so I listen to the Crate and Crowbar, which is a bunch of British ex-game dev or ex-game journalists, some of whom have moved into game dev, just talking about the games they've played and reviewing things. And that's pretty good. And then also another podcast called Cortex, which is by a few YouTubers. And so I've been listening to this a lot longer than I've been doing YouTube, but just talking about their experiences either with YouTube or with like productivity. So kind of like how they use time tracking and that kind of systems. And I started listening to that about the same time I sort of went freelance. So it was quite nice, some quite useful things in there for just kind of like how to approach running your own business. Yeah.
Favorite video game visual effect you're jealous of that isn't your own?
Yeah. So I don't know if this is like a specific effect, but there's a technique that I've not used that I would really love to sort of try out, and that's those are motion vectors. So frame blending motion vectors. I don't know if you've seen this, but Clement Lazar popularized it and has some great kind of breakdowns on his website. But basically, the idea is you use an individual flow map between the frames of your flipbook, and so you get a really smooth kind of like explosion from a very small number or a relatively small number of frames, and the flow map kind of gives you this nice kind of process as the flame blends from one to the next. And yeah, I don't know, I think it would be it's a very powerful technique, it's very cool, but I've never had to explore it in my own work, so I'd quite like to give that a go one day.
Right. I think Unreal Simon has a tutorial on YouTube kind of breaking down the creation of a flipbook in Slate, and then he takes it into Unreal and kind of maps a flow map to it.
Right. Yeah.
Or
yeah,
I'm sorry, a motion vector.
A motion vector map. Yeah, I think it's definitely a very powerful technique, but since I've seen it, I've never really had a chance to do any big explosions. So.
Best advice for a first-time visual effects artist or people looking to get into the industry?
Yeah, I think focus. And hard work pays off. I say this to all my students. The more you put in, the more hours you do, the better you're going to get, the better your chances of getting employed are. And you can't really bypass that. There's no shortcuts to just hard work, unfortunately. But don't be afraid to focus on something. The thing that you find the thing that you are really interested in, whether that's shaders, whether it's simulations, if it's environment, whether it's sculpting or kind of textures, or is it lighting, or is it world building? The industry, although it's small and difficult to get into, it also has this capacity within it for specialisms or specialists. And if you're really interested in rigid body simulation and just doing destruction, you can do that. And as a first sort of way in, having that thing that you're really well practiced in, that you're really focused on, I think helps.
Cool, man. What are you most excited about with the future of visual effects?
Yeah, so we're definitely getting to a point now where, 2 years ago, ray tracing was as a pipe dream. And then 1 year ago, ray tracing was a tech demo. And then a year ago, or now, kind of ray tracing is a thing you can do, right? You can just turn it on. You can go out and buy commercial grade hardware. The first tech demos at GDC were on $40,000 worth of hardware. No one can afford that. Whereas then the ones a year later were on $1,000 graphics card, which is still expensive, but it's still consumer grade. And I think that kind of that dedication and that approach is going to start being focused on effect stuff as well. So we've seen things like Embergen, the real-time fluid solving things, specifically kind of middleware specifically targeted at game real-time VFX. And just if that's working with real-time fluid sims, then how long is it going to be before we have real-time fluid sims kind of in engine? And you've seen things like FlexLM, like the NVIDIA plugins. And so there is all this kind of periphery of cool tech demos happening, but never quite made it into a real video game yet. And I think that's the next step when we start getting all of these real-time solutions that we've been using offline for a long time, but we'll start being able to use them actually at runtime. And that'll be super impressive.
Awesome. What question do you never get asked that you wish you were asked more often?
Actually, how do I do this? Or what do you think of this? So often, especially with my students, but with everyone in the industry, the only way you improve is by getting feedback on your work. And that's what we're here for, right? The people who have been in the industry for a long time, the people who are doing educational stuff. We want to help. We want to make your work better. So people, I think, are quite scared. People get very sort of protective or embarrassed, or do you know what I mean? They don't want to share their work because they don't think it's good enough. And maybe it's not, but how else is it going to get better unless you share your work? So just kind of being reached out more for kind of for feedback and for help. What we're here for. It's what we want to do.
Totally. Any final thoughts or things you want to plug? Maybe share your freelance website or some resources?
Yeah. So, so everything that's about me online is all at tharlevfx.com. So I've got links there to my YouTube, my personal work, links to my marketplace things. I've got some reference videos that I sell on Gumroad for $5. That's 500 hours or 500 videos, I can't remember, of just little 10-second reference videos that I do. my YouTube channel. Like, hopefully I'm going to be spending some more time on that. And if people do have kind of like topics that they're struggling with or they'd like to know more about, then please, send me an email. I'll try and spend a little video focusing on it. Because if you're struggling, you're probably not the only person struggling. So why not ask someone, get that solved just for your own sake? But also it helps everyone. It helps the whole industry. It helps the whole kind of community. So
Cool, man. Thanks so much, Tom, for taking the time to talk with us today. Really appreciate it.
no, my pleasure.
Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed listening to Thomas Harle's interview as much as I enjoyed talking with him. He has so much to offer to the community, and I really encourage you to jump onto his YouTube channel, like some of his videos, and subscribe so you can keep up with some of the cool technical techniques and tricks that he's throwing out at us. Speaking of subscribing, I really want to encourage you to subscribe to this podcast and go ahead and provide some feedback and ideas or topics that maybe you want to explore and hear with the real-time visual effects piece. There's so much that I want to impart on you to learn and grow as a community. You can reach me at travismccullough86@gmail.com, or feel free to hit me up on Discord or in the RTVFX forums. I'm more than happy to hear feedback. Our next episode is going to be with Nicholas Severt, also known as Jenga FX. He's creating a new movement for real-time simulations for different types of effects. And it's going to be super cool to kind of hear all this cool stuff that he's doing out there. Anyways, you guys rock on, and I'll see you next episode.